The badge gleamed beneath layers of dust, forgotten in an evidence box no one bothered to open until a volunteer cleaning day revealed the tarnished emblem beside a worn leather leash labeled simply Bruno. Somewhere else in the building, that same dog lay silent, his service memories folded into stillness. When a former Army nurse and her star-eyed daughter arrive, they aren't hunting legends, just distraction from a rainy weekend. Yet the instant the girl whispers, "Why isn't he barking?" the badge's story ignites. Follow this video to see how a 30-cent brass tag turns into a beacon that rallies veterans, school kids, and even TikTok influencers around a cause no algorithm predicted: senior canine adoption. Stay, and you'll witness a retired shepherd trade gunfire flashbacks for fireplace dreams, a child swap crayon hearts for real ones, and a grieving community find its hero hiding in plain sight. The badge may have lost its shine, but the story's about to blind you with possibility. The barking was endless. High-pitched yelps from the terriers, sharp howls from huskies, the rhythmic throaty barks of labs all layered over the metallic clank of kennel gates and the echoing footsteps of volunteers. The shelter breathed with noise, with movement, with life that pulsed along the concrete corridor like a river of desperate energy. But at the farthest end of that river, where the hallway dimmed and sunlight no longer touched the floor, there was only stillness. There, in the very last kennel, barely more than a shadow lay Bruno. He didn't lift his head when people walked by. He didn't perk his ears or wag his tail. He didn't rise when the food trays slid in with a loud scrape or when the doors clattered open for morning rounds. He hadn't moved from that spot in days, maybe longer. The others called it the quiet kennel, not out of irony, but out of quiet resignation, because Bruno, once a sentinel of alertness and command, had gone utterly silent. His coat, once the glossy black and tan of a proud German shepherd, was now mottled and faded. Patches of fur had thinned near his hind legs, and scars crisscrossed his joints, old memories from work no one asked about anymore. His eyes, clouded with age and time, barely reflected the overhead fluorescence. But they were open, always open, watching without expecting, seeing, but no longer hoping. On the rusted gate hung a tag with a single name, Bruno, engraved into a cracked plastic plate, dulled from years of cleaning agents and weathering. Above it, a faded sticker, Retired Working Dog. Someone had stuck a heart-shaped note on the outside of the kennel once, written in crayon. "He's still a good boy." But even that had curled and peeled off, forgotten like the dog it was meant for. He had once sat straight behind that gate, posture proud, had once pricked his ears at the sound of approaching footsteps, had once stood and faced strangers as if reporting for duty. But time breaks even the most loyal. Bruno didn't know how many days had passed since he arrived, only that the walls here never changed. No scent of home, no smell of the handler he had once followed into smoke-filled buildings and alleyways thick with fear, no command voice to guide him. Only bleach and metal, damp concrete, and the aching cold of nights when even dreams offered no comfort. Something in him still stirred instincts that had been honed and sharpened over years of work. The way he noticed the shift in a volunteer's gait when they were limping. The way he tensed when a stranger's tone turned angry, even if muffled behind 3 doors. The way his ears flicked just once when a storm rolled in from the north. But he no longer acted on any of it, because it no longer mattered. The only time Bruno moved now was when Joanne, the senior staff member, came by during closing. She didn't say much, just refilled his water, swapped out his blanket if it had gone cold with dampness, and sometimes whispered, "Hey there, old boy." Once in a while, when the hallway was empty and the other dogs were asleep, Bruno would shift onto his other side, just enough to ease the ache in his hips. His breaths would slow, steady, and in that moment between sleep and fading, a memory might flicker of a siren, a voice, a warm backseat ride home. But then morning would come, and with it the barks and cages and chatter, and Bruno would return to stillness. He wasn't ignored out of cruelty. No one pointed and laughed. No one teased. In fact, most volunteers walked past him with a kind of unconscious sadness, a brief softening of the eyes before they turned back to the puppies bouncing at the front. But that was the cruelty. Not hatred, but invisibility. There's something worse than being feared or misunderstood. It's being forgotten. Bruno wasn't aggressive. Never had been. He didn't growl or flinch when people approached. He didn't even react when a toddler smacked the kennel once by mistake and giggled. He simply existed, quietly, fully, but apart from everything. On his worst days, he didn't sleep. He endured. On his best days, he imagined a hand reaching through the bars. But lately, even that dream had stopped coming. The world had grown louder, faster, full of people who wanted dogs that fetched sticks, rolled over, wore bow ties, and danced on social media. People who walked into shelters seeking the perfect new beginning. No one came looking for an ending that still needed dignity. And Bruno, he had grown too tired to ask for it. Yet, deep inside him, beneath the years of silence, a part of the canine still listened, still registered the difference between a person who walked by without glancing and one who hesitated, between footsteps that carried laughter and those that carried grief. That part, what remained of the officer in him, stayed alert in its own quiet way. And maybe that was why, on one otherwise forgettable morning, when the shelter buzzed with activity and the scent of new kibble filled the air, Bruno's ears twitched. Just once. Because somewhere far down the corridor, there were new footsteps, small, light, human, accompanied by another pair, older, firmer, heavier with experience. He did not rise, he did not wag, but somewhere inside that worn, trembling body, the dog who still waited, noticed. And sometimes noticing is the first miracle. It had been raining that morning, not the kind of rain that storms in with fury, but the quiet, steady kind, the kind that soaks into everything, even memories. Bruno's last mission had started like any other. His harness was snug, the word Police K9 printed in block white across his side. His paws tapped against the linoleum of the precinct floor as he walked beside his handler, Officer Raymond Hale, a man whose scent Bruno knew better than his own. Their movements were synchronized, like a well-practiced dance. Step, pause, glance. No need for words. They had cleared buildings together, tracked missing persons, detected explosives tucked where no one else would think to check. But that morning, the call was simple. Welfare check on a warehouse outside town. Standard, routine. Until it wasn't. The interior of the warehouse smelled of rust and rot, but Bruno's ears were up. He moved through the shadows, senses scanning, muscles coiled and ready. He paused only when Hale gave the hand signal. Wait. Bruno froze. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't fit. Not footsteps. Not metal. A thud too close. Too heavy. Too wrong. He turned just in time to see his handler stumble backward, one hand gripping his chest. His other hand reached out, not for his gun, not for support, but for Bruno. as if instinctively he had wanted to anchor himself to the one being he trusted most. Bruno lunged forward, whined, pawed at him, confused. Hale collapsed. And then silence. No voice telling Bruno to stay, no order, no gesture. Just rain tapping on broken windows and a dog pressing his head against a still chest, waiting for the command that never came. The medics came next. They shouted, ran, called for stretchers. Bruno was pulled back, gently, respectfully, but his claws scraped the concrete, refusing. He growled once, not out of aggression, but grief. His handler wasn't supposed to fall. That wasn't part of the job. He waited outside the hospital doors for hours, leash clipped to a pipe, unmoving. He didn't blink when the rain soaked through his vest, when the cold set into his joints. He only looked up every time the door swung open, waiting to see those boots, that voice, that scent. But it wasn't Hale who came back. It was someone else, kind, soft-spoken, but not his. Bruno was transferred to a holding facility for retired K-9s. At first, he didn't understand. He barked when strangers approached, not with hostility, but expectation. He sat at attention when meals arrived. He even lay at the front of the kennel ready, alert, waiting. But days turned to weeks. His ears drooped. His posture loosened. No one gave him signals anymore. No one asked him to work. His job, his purpose, had been taken without explanation. Then came the drive to the shelter. A quiet van ride. The handler who brought him there didn't know his name, just called him the Old Shepherd. A clipboard was signed, a leash unclipped. The door clicked shut behind him. The kennel was smaller than the ones before, the walls higher, the air colder. He sniffed for familiar markers, anything to link him to where he had come from. But there was nothing, only bleach and chain link. At first, Bruno stood when people passed, sat in perfect form, made eye contact with every visitor like it was a lineup, and anyone might say, "That one, that's him." But no one ever did. He's too old. Scary eyes. Does he even move? Poor guy. Someone'll take him eventually. Eventually became a month, then 2, then almost a year. The staff stopped putting treats in his bowl. They stayed untouched. They started calling him Quiet Bruno, not out of affection, but identification. The other dogs learned to jump, to yelp, to perform. They were younger, eager. Bruno watched them come and go, tails wagging into new lives. And still he remained. Quiet, still. Not because he didn't feel, but because feeling without being chosen, that breaks something. Joanne, the senior staff member, was the only one who still spoke to him like he was more than a file. "I know, boy," she'd murmur while cleaning his space. "I know you remember. I see it in you." And Bruno? He didn't respond, but his ears twitched. Once. Sometimes, deep in the night, he'd dream. Of footsteps beside him, heavy and measured. Of the smell of gun oil and coffee. Of the sound of his name, not as a label on a gate, but a call to action. "Bruno, go!" He always went. Now there was nowhere to go, just a cracked nameplate, a torn blanket, a silence that even barking couldn't break anymore. He still woke each morning before the lights came on, as if expecting formation. But no handler came, no routine, no reason. He rose less and less, drank slower. His eyes, once sharp enough to read the twitch of a criminal's hand, now just watched people pass. not with hope, but with understanding. They were not here for him. They never were. The mornings always began the same. Metal rolled. Doors clanged open. Fluorescent lights flickered on, casting long, pale beams across the cold concrete floors. The shelter woke with urgency, like it was trying to pretend it had slept well, even when everyone knew it hadn't. And then came the people. Some arrived with clipboards, some with coffee, some with children whose fingers pressed into glass and pointed with wide-eyed delight. They walked the rows like they were at a carnival, laughing, crouching, waving fingers through the bars of kennels as excited barks rose to meet them. Dogs jumped against chain-link gates, tails wagging, eyes wide. Some spun in frantic circles, others pawed at the metal, tongues out, hearts on full display. A few barked so much their voices cracked by mid-afternoon. Bruno didn't move. He didn't even blink when the footsteps came closer. Didn't flinch when voices leaned in near his gate. "Oh, look at this one. So cute. Do you think he's a husky mix? That one's too loud. Let's try this guy. He's got spots." Every now and then, someone's gaze would sweep to the back corner, to the kennel where the shadows lived. Bruno's kennel. But their eyes never stopped there for long. Sometimes they did pause, but not out of interest. "He's kind of scary-looking. Why is he just lying there like that? Does he bite?" "No, honey, not that one. Let's keep going." The worst were the ones who looked at him with pity. "He's too old. He's not going to be around much longer." "Poor guy, huh? Hope someone takes him soon." And then they moved on. They always moved on. Bruno stayed still through it all. Not because he didn't hear them. He heard everything. The clinking of leash clasps, the squeak of sneakers on wet concrete, the high-pitched giggle of a toddler feeding biscuits through a gate 4 kennels down. But none of it belonged to him. His bowl sat full in the corner, still untouched from breakfast. The water inside barely rippled. His blanket, thin and beginning to fray at the corners, was tucked beneath his aching hips. Someone had once placed a toy beside it, a stuffed duck missing one wing. It hadn't been moved in weeks. Joanne made her rounds, clipboard in one hand, her other free to tug at the broken latch or adjust a water bowl. She moved through the kennels with practiced warmth. She cooed at the excitable husky, chuckled when the beagle howled like a siren, gave an extra treat to the blind terrier near the front. But when she reached the end of the hallway, when the air grew quieter, the echoes thinner, she always paused. Bruno didn't greet her. Not anymore. But she still looked at him like he was someone. She crouched outside his gate now, pen tapping idly against her thigh. "Still waiting, huh, Bruno?" she said softly. Bruno didn't lift his head. But his eyes, those clouded amber eyes, shifted, barely, just enough to show he'd heard. Joanne reached through the bars, careful not to invade. She adjusted his blanket, smoothing the corner that had curled on itself. She ran her fingers lightly along the steel water bowl to make sure it was clean. "Heard a family asking about shepherds today," she whispered, mostly to herself. "But you know how it is. They want puppies, energy, videos they can post. You're not that anymore, huh?" Bruno blinked slowly. He didn't wag his tail, didn't stretch his legs. But there was a moment fleeting, almost imperceptible, where something behind his eyes shifted. Not recognition, not hope. Resignation. The kind that settles in when you've heard every footstep and still know none of them will stop for you. Joanne stood and sighed through her nose, brushing her hands on her jeans. She lingered a second longer than necessary, then moved on. The hallway filled with chatter again. Leashes snapped, doors swung. A volunteer announced that another dog had just found a forever home. Cheers followed. Someone clapped. Bruno didn't move. From his place in the corner, the world sounded like it was happening far away. It didn't make him bitter, just quieter. He'd stopped trying, stopped sitting up, stopped looking when someone passed. Hope, after all, is only cruel when it's unanswered. The shelter's noise swelled like a tide, and deep in its farthest corner, Bruno, the dog no one saw anymore, closed his eyes, not to sleep, but simply to rest from watching. Because sometimes the hardest part of being forgotten isn't the silence. It's remembering what it felt like to be remembered. There were dogs everywhere in the house. Not real ones, not yet. But sketched in crayon across scrap paper, drawn with a child's steady hope. Some had floppy ears, others stood tall like guardians. Some wore capes or hats, or had names scrawled beneath them. Brave, Sunny, Bolt. One had a bright pink collar and the word Ours written with a backwards R. Mira had been leaving them everywhere on the fridge, on her mom's bedside table, tucked into the pages of the bills Clara sorted through at night. She didn't ask directly anymore. She had learned that the word dog made her mom's jaw tighten just a little, so she let the pictures speak for her, and the notes. Little yellow sticky tabs placed carefully around the apartment. I'll feed him every day, Pinky promise. He can sleep in my room. I don't mind if he snores. Dogs need love too. Please just come look. That's all. They were signed with hearts and Mira at the bottom, like a gentle petition she hoped might eventually wear her mother down. Clara had stopped peeling them off the walls. Now she just let them be. It wasn't that Clara hated dogs. Far from it. She'd grown up with them big, blocky mutts that barked at the mailman and licked spilled soup off the floor. But after her deployment, after the hospital rotations, and the field evacuations, and the nights where her hands shook even when they were empty, Clara had started needing her space to be quiet, predictable, safe. A dog, especially a shelter dog, meant mess, meant unknowns, meant opening up to something that might not stay. And Clara had had enough goodbyes for one lifetime. But Mira was persistent in the softest way. She never begged, never threw tantrums. She simply hoped, out loud, all the time. She'd daydream at the breakfast table. If we had a dog, I'd name him Marbles. Or while brushing her teeth. Do you think dogs like bubblegum toothpaste? Or standing at the window in pajamas, staring out at the street? Some dogs don't even have homes. Isn't that the saddest thing, Mom? Clara would offer a small smile, non-committal, the kind of smile that tried not to hurt, but stayed guarded. One night after a long shift at the clinic, Clara walked into the kitchen to find Mira asleep at the table, her head resting beside a drawing of a large, shaggy dog. A little heart had been drawn over its chest. In the corner, Mira had written, "He doesn't have to be a puppy. I just want him to feel safe." That was the first time Clara cried over the idea of a dog, not because she wanted one, but because her daughter wanted to give something safety. Clara carried Mira to bed, tucking the crayon drawing under the pillow like a forgotten wish. Then she sat at the edge of the bed for a long while, watching the slow rise and fall of her daughter's breathing. So calm, so sure. The next morning, as Mira tied her shoes with the determined slowness only children have, Clara knelt beside her. "We're not getting a dog," she said flatly. Mira didn't say anything. Her fingers fumbled slightly at the knot. "But," Clara added, her voice quieter now, If we just wanted to look. Mira froze. Her eyes lifted slowly. Clara exhaled. If we just wanted to visit the shelter, just to see. That might be okay. The moment stretched. Mira didn't blink. Then her face broke open like sunrise. Really? She whispered. Clara raised an eyebrow. Just to look? Mira launched forward, arms flung around Clara's neck like a lasso of joy. We can just look all day if you want. I'll bring my notebook and we can take notes on the ones we meet and... Clara laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. Slow down, Miss Zoologist. She tried to keep her voice even, her expression neutral, but Mira's joy was infectious. It had that lightness only children carried, a belief that good things could happen if you just gave them a door to walk through. Clara wasn't sure what she was walking into. She only knew that her daughter had left enough sticky notes in her heart to wear her down, and the thought of saying no one more time just to protect herself suddenly felt too heavy. So she grabbed her keys, zipped up Mira's coat, and reached for her phone. The shelter's address was still saved in her browser from a week ago when she'd looked it up in a moment of quiet weakness and then told herself she was just being curious. Okay, she said as they stepped out into the cold air, the sky overcast but soft. We're just going to look. Got it? Mira nodded quickly, her boots tapping on the steps. Just looking, of course. But her hand found Clara's, and she held it tight just in case. The moment Mira stepped through the glass doors, the shelter seemed to erupt. It wasn't chaos, not exactly. It was joyful noise, vibrating through every concrete wall and metal gate. Barks overlapped like music with too many instruments, each one a different pitch, a different rhythm. Excited yelps, eager howls, deep-chested woofs that bounced down the hallway. Tails thumped against walls, metal clanged against metal, paws scratched frantically at kennel gates. Mira stopped mid-step, eyes going wide. She turned slowly in place, taking it all in like she had just entered the gates of some mythical kingdom. "Mom," she breathed, "do you hear them all talking?" Clara, a few feet behind her, zipped up her jacket a little higher and nodded with a thin smile. "They're definitely saying something." The air smelled of disinfectant, warm fur, and the faintest undertone of wet concrete. It wasn't unpleasant, just raw, real. The scent of a place that pulsed with life even when everything around it said temporary. A staff member with curly hair and a bright orange vest appeared behind a small desk, clipboard in hand. "Welcome in," she said, cheerful but not pushy. "First time here?" Clara stepped forward, already half regretting her decision. "Yes, just looking." The woman nodded knowingly. "Perfect. That's the best place to start." She handed Clara a folded brochure. "Meet our pups," and offered Mira a small, soft plush bone. "For your future friend," she said with a wink. Mira clutched it like treasure. Clara glanced around, mentally calculating exits, restrooms, the hand sanitizer station. She was already anticipating how to politely decline the first overly enthusiastic staff member who tried to match them with a dog that had a big personality. They passed through a doorway into the main kennel corridor. The moment they entered, a golden retriever threw himself at the gate in front of them, tongue lolling, paws sliding against the bars. Mira squealed with delight. "Mom, he's smiling. He's definitely excited," Clara replied, sidestepping the spray of drool that followed a particularly enthusiastic tail wag. The row continued. A pair of beagle mixes barked in tandem. ears flopping like oversized fans. A pit mix rolled over and pushed his belly against the bars the moment Mira crouched in front of him. A lanky black lab began hopping in place, his eyes locked onto Mira like she was a long-lost sibling. Each dog was a different kind of love letter, written in fur and noise. Mira stopped at almost every kennel. Her hand never reached through the bars. She remembered the sign at the front. But she crouched low and whispered greetings like she was speaking to shy classmates on the first day of school. Clara followed slowly, watching. She couldn't deny her daughter looked lighter here, more alive. Like the noise didn't overwhelm her at all. In fact, it filled her with something that Clara herself had been missing for years. Still, Clara kept her walls high. They weren't getting a dog. This was a field trip, a kindness, a contained experience. But her resolve wavered just slightly each time Mira giggled. "Mom, this one's named Macaroni." "Mom, this one sneezed when I said hi." "Mom, come look, this one has a heart-shaped spot." Clara crouched beside her once, in front of a squirmy boxer puppy who looked like he'd explode from his own energy. Mira reached toward the gate. "He's funny, right?" Clara smiled politely. "He's a lot." They moved on. Another staff member approached, this one older, wearing a worn denim jacket over her vest. "Let me know if any of them feel like the one," she said kindly. Mira nodded, but her brow was furrowed now. Something had changed. As they passed the 6th kennel, then the 7th, Clara noticed it. Mira was still engaged, but more thoughtful. She wasn't bouncing between gates anymore. She was slowing down, watching more. "Nothing clicking?" Clara asked quietly. Mira shook her head. "They're all really nice." "But I don't know," Mira said. "It's like they're all talking, but I can't hear what they're saying to me." Clara blinked. That wasn't the answer she'd expected. Mira took a step toward another kennel where a dachshund spun in circles, trying to catch its tail. But she didn't crouch, didn't smile. She just tilted her head, curious, listening. There was nothing wrong with any of them. They were all beautiful, loving, bright. But Mira's focus wasn't where Clara thought it would be. She wasn't chasing excitement. She was waiting for something, or someone. Clara glanced down at the brochure in her hand, barely realizing she still held it. Each page had a list of names, notes scribbled in different pens. High energy, best with older kids, needs time to adjust. Nothing jumped out at her. Mira was already several steps ahead now, her boots squeaking faintly on the polished floor. She turned left at the next corner without hesitation, like she knew where she was going. Clara followed. Another hallway. This one quieter. And from the distance, something shifted, but they hadn't reached that part yet. Not quite. They had nearly reached the end of the corridor when Mira stopped walking. Clara didn't notice it at first. She was still flipping absent-mindedly through the brochure, nodding occasionally at the staff member a few kennels back who was praising a spaniel for being house-trained. But Mira had frozen. Not in fear, not in excitement. In something else, something softer, something still. Clara looked up. "Mira?" Her daughter didn't answer right away. She was standing in front of the last kennel in the row, her small hand resting on the cold metal gate, not moving. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. "Mom?" Clara stepped closer. "What is it?" Mira tilted her head slightly, her brow furrowed. "That one's not barking." The words came out strange, like they didn't fit in the space, like they weren't part of the song this place had been playing since they walked in. In a corridor filled with movement and voices and wagging tails, there was a pocket of complete silence. Clara followed her daughter's gaze and saw him. In the very last kennel, tucked so deep into the corner that even the light barely reached him, lay a dog that didn't lift his head, didn't twitch an ear, didn't turn to greet them. He didn't move at all. Bruno. At first glance, Clara thought he might be asleep, or worse. But then she saw it, his chest rising, slow and steady, the rhythm of someone not quite living, not quite gone. He was large, but the size of him was diminished by the way he curled in on himself, spine bowed, legs tucked tight like he was trying to take up less space than he'd been given. His coat was patchy in places, dulled with age. A faded name tag hung on the kennel gate, worn and cracked. Bruno. That was all it said. No age, no description, no handwritten hearts around it like some of the others had. Mira crouched down slowly, her voice still hushed. "Why's he in the dark?" Clara didn't answer. She didn't know how to. The dog still hadn't moved. But now that Clara was closer, she could see his eyes open, watching, distant. Not alert, not scared, just there. The kind of eyes that had seen too much, the kind that had stopped waiting for anything new. Something about him made the hair on Clara's arms rise, not from fear but from familiarity, from the shape of his stillness, from the way he looked out without reaching out. She knew that feeling. Mira pressed her face a little closer to the bars, but not too close. She didn't reach her hand out. She just stared. "He's the only one not trying," she said softly. Clara crouched beside her, knees cracking as they met the concrete. The chill from the floor seeped in almost instantly, but she didn't move. The hallway felt quieter here. The barking still echoed behind them, but it was distant now, muted, as if this corner had been given its own silence, one the rest of the world had agreed not to disturb. Clara let her gaze settle on Bruno again. Something about him, about the way he lay there like stone, about the shape of his ribs beneath that thinning coat ached in a place she thought she'd closed off years ago. She opened her mouth to say something, to redirect, to explain, but the words didn't come, because there was nothing to explain, only that her daughter, somehow, had seen him. Not just noticed him, seen him. Bruno didn't react to their presence. No ear twitch, no lifted head. Only his eyes shifted, the barest movement, like he was checking if this moment was real or just another flicker in the dark. "Do you think he hears us?" Mira asked. Clara nodded slowly. "I think so. But he doesn't want to talk?" Clara hesitated. Then quietly, "Maybe he's just forgotten how." Mira didn't move away. She stayed crouched there, small and quiet, as if understanding the weight of the stillness, as if honoring it. Clara watched her daughter, this small, bright, relentless being who had dragged her here with hope stitched into every sticky note, and felt something unfamiliar press against the inside of her ribs. Bruno's eyes drifted between them, back and forth, still unmoving but aware. And then, for just a breath of a second, Clara felt it. The world went still, not quiet still, like the kind of pause that happens just before a thread is pulled, like something was waiting. And somehow, it wasn't just him anymore. Mira stayed still longer than any child Clara had ever seen. No bouncing, no tugging at her sleeve, just a quiet, deep stillness that seemed far too grown for 7 years old. Her little fingers curled around the metal gate, knuckles pale where they clutched, eyes fixed on the dog that hadn't barked, hadn't moved, hadn't offered anything but silence. And yet, she stayed. Without a word, Mira slowly crouched down again, knees touching the cold concrete. Her backpack with the pink cartoon puppy slipped from her shoulder and landed with a soft thump beside her. She didn't seem to notice. Then, gently, so gently it was almost reverent, she reached one hand through the bars. Clara took a half-step forward instinctively. "Mira!" But her daughter's eyes didn't leave Bruno. "It's okay," Mira whispered. "I won't touch him." Her hand hovered there in the air, open, palm up, fingers curved slightly inward, like she wasn't offering anything but space. A long silence, and then a shift. Not a full movement, not even a stretch. But Bruno's nose twitched. A single inhale, soft, careful, suspicious. He sniffed again, faint, barely audible but unmistakable. His head remained on his paws, eyes half-lidded and distant, but his nostrils flared once more as Mira's scent reached him. Clara stood frozen, unsure what to feel. Her instincts told her to intervene, to close the distance between her daughter and this stranger with fur and history and God knows what inside him. But something else, some softer, older voice, told her not to, because this wasn't danger. This was something else. A tension made of grief, not fear, of longing, not teeth. Clara's fingers wrapped around the strap of her purse tighter, but she didn't speak again. She just watched. Mira's hand stayed where it was, steady. Her voice came again, low and warm. "You don't have to come closer. I just wanted to say hi." Bruno's eyes flicked, just barely, toward her hand, not her face. Not yet. Joanne's footsteps approached from behind them, quiet rubber soles on concrete. She stopped a respectful distance back, like she'd seen this kind of moment before. "Most folks don't make it this far down," Joanne said softly. Clara turned slightly, not taking her eyes off Mira and the dog. "We almost didn't." Joanne smiled with something behind it, something tired and kind. "He's been here the longest, over a year now. Came in with a badge number and no handler. Just a crate, a file, and silence." "His name's Bruno?" Clara asked. Joanne nodded. "Yeah. Former police K-9. Retired. More like left behind, honestly. They usually have someone to vouch for them, but not this one. His partner never came. We were told heart attack during a raid. Bruno wouldn't leave the body. They had to carry him away." Clara's chest tightened. Mira was still crouched, unmoving, still holding her hand out, still breathing slowly, like she'd somehow found the rhythm Bruno was hiding in. "He doesn't bark," Mira said. "Not even when we came close." "No," Joanne replied, stepping a bit closer now, but staying beside Clara. "Stopped making noise a few months after he got here. At first we thought something was wrong, medically, but it wasn't his voice. It was his hope." Clara didn't know what to say to that. "I bring him blankets," Joanne continued quietly. "Different ones. He only ever keeps the ones that smell like other dogs." "Why?" Mira asked, glancing back briefly. "Maybe he thinks they'll come back for him," Joanne said. Then, after a pause, "Or maybe it's just the only thing that reminds him he was part of something once." Clara's throat felt dry. She didn't know why this was hitting her so hard. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way Mira hadn't tried to fix anything, just offered presence. The same presence Clara herself had forgotten how to give since... Well, Bruno sniffed again, And then, so slowly Clara could barely track it, he shifted his paw forward, half an inch. An old gesture dulled by time, not to touch, just to be closer. Mira smiled, just a little. "You're not scary," she said softly. "You're just tired." Joanne exhaled, a quiet sound filled with years. "He's had a few meet and greets," she said. "Families want the story, the hero dog, but not the work, not the broken parts. Too old, too big, too sad." Clara spoke without thinking. "But still here." Joanne nodded. Still here. And somehow so was Clara. She had promised Mira it was just a visit, just a little look. No commitments, just a way to close the loop on the endless sticky notes and drawings and hopeful sighs. But this wasn't something she'd prepared for, not the weight of a dog who didn't move, not the shape of a child who understood that kind of silence. She felt something shift deep inside her, soft and reluctant. And she knew. The story had already started. The low hum of the shelter faded into the background, muffled barks, the scratch of nails on linoleum, the distant sound of someone spraying down a kennel. But around Bruno's enclosure, it was still. Not silent, exactly. Just reverent, like the world had lowered its voice. Joanne crouched beside Mira, her knees cracking slightly, as she settled into the posture of someone who'd done this before, told stories that didn't have clean endings. "He came to us about 15 months ago," she began quietly. "We didn't get much info, just that he was a K9, assigned to patrol narcotics. Served 3 years. His handler didn't make it." Clara stiffened slightly. Mira didn't move, still watching Bruno, whose gaze remained pinned to some invisible place just past the bars. "They were on a bust," Joanne continued. "Not even the worst one. Just a routine house check, supposedly empty. But it wasn't. His partner had a heart attack mid-entry. Bruno stayed by his side, refused to leave even when the medics came. They say he growled when they tried to pull him away." Clara's hand slowly curled around her coat zipper. Not because she was cold, but because something inside her tightened at the image of a trained dog refusing protocol in favor of loyalty. Heartbreak, not disobedience. "And the family?" she asked. Joanne glanced up. "Didn't want him?" Clara blinked. "Too much responsibility. Said he was damaged. Said he wasn't their burden to carry. That was the word they used, burden." A long pause. Mira looked up at her mother, but Clara couldn't meet her daughter's eyes. Not yet. Joanne stood slowly, brushing her hands on her jeans. "He used to sit up every time someone passed," she said. "Like clockwork, back straight, alert, waiting." Clara already knew the rest, but she asked anyway. "When did he stop?" Joanne's smile was the kind that hurt to see. "A few months ago." Mira finally looked up at Joanne. Her voice was small but steady. "Did he stop because he thought no one was coming?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Joanne replied gently. "Maybe." Clara turned her face away slightly. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed like a memory. The sound of a waiting room, of field tents, of soldiers breathing through pain and fog and morphine while others didn't get the chance. She'd seen this before. Not the dog, but the pattern. The limp in someone's eyes when they stopped being needed. The collapse that comes not from broken bones, but from the weight of being left behind. How many of her patients had waited for someone to come back for them, only to find the war didn't end. It just moved on without them? Clara wasn't thinking like a mother now. She was thinking like a medic, and the quiet truth settled in her gut like cold iron. Bruno wasn't just a dog. He was a veteran, without a home, a soldier without a name tag, an echo with breath and bone. Mira broke the silence again. Her voice was a whisper, barely more than breath, but it held something more ancient than her years. "I think he's still waiting." Clara swallowed hard. Joanne didn't answer. She just let the weight of the words settle in the room like dust that wouldn't be swept away. Bruno hadn't moved since they arrived. But something in the stillness had changed. Not movement, not hope, just a shift in presence, like the way a room shifts when someone who understands finally walks in. "He doesn't need toys or treats," Joanne said softly. "We've tried. He won't eat until everyone else has, won't lie down until lights are off. He only responds to commands if you use military phrasing." Clara looked at him again. Really looked. The posture, the stillness, the restraint. A soldier. And somewhere deep inside her, past the exhaustion, the practicality, the armor she'd built out of late shifts and quiet dinners and bills paid on time, something cracked. Not broke. Cracked. A place soft enough to remember what it felt like to kneel beside someone else's pain and say, "I'm still here." Mira leaned her head lightly against the gate, nose nearly touching the bars. "Maybe he just needs someone to wait with him," she whispered. And Bruno blinked, slow, deliberate, measured. Not hope, but maybe not emptiness either. Clara stood with her arms crossed, posture angled just enough to seem like she wasn't fully involved, but her eyes betrayed her. They didn't leave Mira. Or Bruno. There was no sound now, just the distant whir of a ceiling fan and the rhythmic breath of something unspoken. Mira sat on the cold concrete floor, legs folded, her little hands still resting on the metal bars as if any contact, might anchor something that was slipping through time. Bruno hadn't moved, not an inch. But his eyes, they were blinking again. Not random, not rapid, deliberate, as though something in him, buried under commands, silence, and loss, was testing if the world was still watching. Clara exhaled slowly, almost soundlessly. She wanted to say something, anything, that could explain what Mira was feeling, what Clara herself almost understood but couldn't name. She wanted to put it in adult terms. Rational terms. Wanted to explain the psychology of trauma bonding, of animal behavior, of protective instincts and false projections. But nothing came, because the truth was too raw for logic. This wasn't about a dog, not anymore. It was about what he represented. Loyalty that didn't vanish when the uniform came off. Stillness that echoed every unshed tear. Waiting that outlasted even death. She crouched slowly beside her daughter, joints tight from years of sleeping on makeshift cots, from bending over bandaged limbs and IV bags. She watched Mira closely, how still she was, how present. Not tugging, not pleading, just there. And she realized Mira knew that this wasn't a toy or a prize or even a wish come true. This was grief on 4 legs, still living, still breathing, still hoping, just enough not to fall apart. Clara finally spoke, but her voice was half air, half confession. "You know, he's not going to be like the others." Mira nodded without turning her head. "I know. He doesn't play fetch. He doesn't wag his tail. He might not even remember how to be in a home." Mira blinked slowly, mirroring the dog. "Then we can learn together." Clara looked at her daughter, this tiny human with scraped knees and tangled hair, who somehow saw past fur and fear and into something far older than either of them. She wanted to say, "It's too much responsibility." She wanted to say, "He might never recover." She wanted to say, "You're just a child. You don't understand what broken means." But Mira was teaching her what presence meant. That understanding didn't always come from knowing, it came from being. Stillness, quiet, time. And suddenly, all the reasons not to dissolved like frost under a gentle sun. Mira's hand didn't flinch when Bruno inched his nose closer, just half an inch. Not a nuzzle, not a sniff, just an acknowledgement, like a soldier saluting across enemy lines, unsure of the outcome but willing to try. Clara felt something unfamiliar pool in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or the ache of it. Mira whispered without turning her head, as if loudness might break the spell. "Can we meet him?" Clara didn't answer, but she didn't say no. And for the first time in months, Bruno's eyelids didn't lower out of resignation. They lowered, like rest, like trust learning to breathe again. The metallic clink of keys was barely louder than a breath, but in the hush that had blanketed the room it sounded like thunder. Joanne's hands were steady, but her eyes betrayed a gentle reverence. As she slid the key into the lock of Bruno's kennel, she glanced over her shoulder toward Clara and Mira crouched quietly outside the gate. "No sudden moves," she whispered, not as a warning, but like someone entering sacred ground. The latch released with a dull snap. Bruno didn't stir. He had watched the whole ritual unfold with unblinking eyes, head resting between his paws like a statue of memory. There was no excitement, no suspicion, just a long-held stillness, practiced and perfected over weeks, maybe months. Joanne crouched slightly, letting him see the leash. Her voice was low. "Hey, big guy, we're not gonna rush you, just a little walk, yeah?" The blue nylon leash unfurled like a river in her hands. She reached in slowly, looping it gently around his neck. There was a pause, a sacred beat of time, when the collar clicked into place. Still, Bruno didn't move. His body remained grounded, heavy, as if the weight of disappointment had taught him long ago not to rise too quickly. Across the kennel gate, Mira waited. Her small hands were folded, resting on her knees. She didn't wiggle, didn't bounce. She just waited, the way she had waited for the rain to stop after her father's funeral, the way she waited for her mother's face to soften on the quiet days. Clara was beside her, not speaking, but present. Her palms rested on the concrete floor, steadying herself against a gravity she couldn't name. Bruno finally blinked, then lifted his head. A shift, not dramatic, but real. Joanne stepped back slowly, giving space. "You can open it now," she said quietly. Clara reached forward and with care unlatched the gate. It opened with a whisper, a creak that sounded more like a question than a door. Bruno remained still, nose twitching faintly. His ears flicked once. His tail didn't move, but his paws, slow and deliberate, adjusted under him. One, then the other. Mira didn't flinch. "Hi, Bruno," she said, so soft it barely reached the air. "You don't have to be scared. We're not here to make you go." Clara added, almost reflexively, "Just meet us halfway." Bruno stood, not fully tall. His frame wasn't at attention like in the photos Mira had seen on the wall, those proud shots of him in uniform beside his handler. This was different. This was an old soldier rising, Not because he believed again, but because someone waited and didn't ask for anything in return. He stepped to the edge of the kennel, ears neither pinned nor perked, his gaze locked with Mira's. Still no tail wag, no bark, but when Mira leaned forward, just enough to brush her fingers along the top of his paw, he didn't pull away, and that was everything. Clara's breath caught without meaning to. Joanne nodded slightly, a smile breaking through her lined face. Sometimes, it's not about trust being given. It's about it being remembered. The leash hung between them, loose, unforced. Bruno didn't lead. He didn't follow. He simply stood between the two worlds he had known. The one behind him, cold and static, and the one in front of him, warm and uncertain. Then, without a word, he took one step forward, and for the first time in a long time, the gate didn't close behind him. The room held its breath. Even the air, heavy with the mingled scent of antiseptic and old fur, seemed to pause waiting. Bruno's body remained still at the threshold of his kennel, the leash slack between him and the world he'd been absent from. For a long moment he simply looked ahead, not toward any one person, but through them, as if trying to remember a map he hadn't walked in years. Then his front paw lifted. It hovered, unsure, as if the floor in front of him might crumble. His body followed, slow, trembling with a stiffness that was part age, part memory. The weight of 100 moments told him not to hope. But someone waited. One step, then another. Two fragile, unsteady movements that cracked the silence open like sunlight through dust. Mira's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Her fingers gripped the hem of her jacket. She didn't blink, didn't even breathe. Clara's posture straightened almost imperceptibly. Her hand rested lightly on Mira's shoulder, not guiding, just grounding. She didn't understand the magic of this, not yet, but she felt its pulse. "That's the most he's moved in weeks," Joanne whispered, the edges of her voice blurred by emotion she wasn't expecting. Maybe longer. Bruno stood now outside the kennel, just barely. His paws splayed slightly on the concrete, searching for balance. His chest rose once, then again in shallow exhales. His tail remained still, but his ears flicked at the sounds of shoes shifting, breath hitching. And Mira, she leaned in slightly. Not enough to crowd him. Not enough to disrupt the fragile thread pulling him forward, just enough to be present. "We're right here," she said, soft, certain. Not a promise, not a plea. Just a truth, small and steady. Bruno blinked. It was a slow, deliberate gesture. Not of tiredness, but something else. Recognition. Maybe not of Mira, not of Clara, not of this place with its 2 bright walls and 2 thin blankets, but of a presence that didn't ask anything from him. Not protection, not obedience, not performance, just being. His head tilted slightly, nose lifting in Mira's direction. The leash nudged forward as his shoulder followed an inch, maybe 2, but the shift was undeniable. Clara watched with a growing knot in her chest, the kind she used to feel when watching a soldier try to stand again for the first time after surgery. That painful, sacred blend of hope and fear. Joanne didn't speak. She didn't move. Her hands were folded now, as if in prayer. The room stayed hushed, no barking from the other kennels, no jangling keys or squeaky toys. Even time had slowed its rhythm to witness this, and Mira, still crouched, whispered again, "It's okay. You're not alone." The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Outside, a truck rumbled past without stopping. But inside this small hallway of concrete and metal gates, something began to thaw. Bruno's legs trembled, not just from age but from unused courage, but he didn't step back, and that was everything. Bruno stood motionless in the middle of the corridor, not frozen in fear, but as if suspended in a moment that didn't quite know what came next. His leash dangled loosely from Joanne's gentle grip. Behind them, the metal door to his kennel remained open, its shadow stretched along the floor like a quiet memory. Ahead, Mira still crouched, her eyes wide, not from excitement, but something deeper. Reverence, maybe. Or wonder. Clara's arms remained folded, though her grip had loosened. She had spent most of her adult life learning to assess before engaging. That was the nurse in her, the soldier's widow, the mother who had learned to rebuild with quiet efficiency after the world fell apart. But watching Bruno now, this creature of muscle and memory, of bruised dignity and dormant hope, something inside her shifted. Not quickly, not loudly, like thawed ground softening beneath snow. She took a slow step forward, eyes still on him. Joanne looked over, hesitant. "You don't have to decide today," she offered gently. "Some people visit a few times. He's not like the others. He may never bounce back the way people hope." Clara didn't respond at first. Her gaze stayed fixed on Bruno's hunched shoulders, the way his ears no longer flinched at movement, how his tail didn't even twitch. He was a dog untrained in hope, a soldier never called home. Mira rose quietly, brushing her knees off, but didn't break the moment. And then Clara spoke, not to anyone in particular, but as if she were discovering the words as they left her mouth. "Maybe they don't need to bounce back," she murmured. "Maybe they just need a soft place to land." The words settled like dust in warm light. Joanne blinked, her throat catching unexpectedly. Bruno didn't react, not outwardly, but his breathing had slowed, less shallow, less defensive, as if some ancient alarm inside him had just been turned off. Clara stepped closer. She reached for the leash. And Bruno, wounded, weary Bruno, let her. Her fingers closed around the worn nylon. It was nothing dramatic. No bark, no tail wag, no cinematic swell of redemption. Just quiet consent. Clara glanced at Mira, who stood waiting, not with expectation, but something gentler. Trust. And that was when Clara knew. Not because it was easy, not because she was ready, but because he had taken those 2 steps yesterday, and because today she could take his. "We'll take him," Clara said. The words left no room for debate. They were not loud, but they were final. A declaration, a surrender, a beginning. Joanne exhaled quietly, the tension in her shoulders melting. "I'll get the paperwork." As she stepped away, Mira didn't cheer or clap or throw her arms around her mother. She just moved beside Bruno and sat back down, her shoulder near his paw. Not touching, just being. And for the first time since the leash had been clipped on, Bruno sat, slowly, heavily. But he sat, because maybe, finally, he understood what Clara meant. This wasn't a mission. It was a landing. The paperwork came quickly, too quickly for Clara's heart to keep up. Joanne walked them through each form page by page. Microchip registration, previous medical notes, disclaimers about age and behavior. The printouts were slightly smudged in the corners, touched by other hands that once almost took Bruno home, but never did. Clara signed her name 3 times, then again at the bottom. She had written it 1,000 times in her life on prescriptions, on lease renewals, on condolence cards. But this felt different. Each stroke of the pen not just an agreement, but a promise whispered in ink. We won't leave him behind. The staff hovered nearby, not out of obligation, but something gentler, affection. One of them brought out a tattered tennis ball, another set a small bag of kibble by Clara's feet. Gestures of quiet hope. Awkward excitement rippled through them like children trying not to spook a bird that had finally decided to land. Joanne unlatched the kennel gate one last time. Bruno didn't flinch. He stood slowly, as if pulled up not by will but by some invisible thread of muscle memory. One foot, then the next. Each step slow, deliberate, not resistance, just unfamiliarity. The hallway seemed longer this time. Mira walked slightly ahead, turning back every few paces to be sure he followed. She didn't speak, only offered her hand out when they passed a corner or reached a doorway. A little anchor, just within reach, if he wanted it. Bruno didn't take it, but he didn't turn away either. They reached the front doors. Sunlight streamed in wide and soft across the shelter lobby. Outside, the car sat waiting. A nondescript sedan with crumpled fast food wrappers in the back seat and a cracked Hello Kitty sticker on the window home in the shape of something ordinary. As Clara opened the passenger door, Mira moved to Bruno's side. Not to tug, not to coax, just to be near. She reached a hand through the loop of his leash, past the space between fur and collar, and rested her fingers lightly on his back. Not patting, not scratching, just feeling. His fur was coarse, not unclean but tired, like the blanket he never slept on. "You can come now," she whispered. And Bruno did. He climbed into the back seat without pause. No tail wag, no whine, just silent compliance, like another mission, another ride, another transfer. Nothing new. Clara slid into the driver's seat and adjusted the mirror. Bruno stared straight ahead, unmoving. His eyes didn't scan. His ears didn't twitch. He sat like something placed, not someone chosen. But Mira looked at him like he was already home. And for now, that was enough. The road home was lined with early spring trees, still bare, still hesitant, just like the car's passengers. The engine hummed in soft rhythm beneath them, a low, steady sound that filled the silence without intruding on it. Bruno lay curled in the back seat, not quite asleep, not quite awake. His body formed a cautious crescent on the old plaid blanket Mira had begged to bring, frayed edges tucked under his paws like something sacred. His breathing was slow, shallow, as if he wasn't sure this ride wouldn't end like all the others back at a gate, behind a latch. He hadn't made a sound since they left the shelter parking lot. Neither had Clara. She kept her eyes on the road, mostly. But the rearview mirror betrayed her. Again and again her gaze flicked upward. Not at Mira. At him. At the dog whose presence filled the cabin in a way words couldn't. She saw his ears, not alert but not fully drooped either. She saw how his body didn't press against the seat, didn't claim space. He perched like he might need to disappear on command. In the seat beside him, Mira sat with both hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't reach for him, didn't speak, didn't whisper like she had before. Just sat close, shoulder turned ever so slightly in his direction, present without pressing, a quiet companion to his cautious solitude. At one red light, Clara glanced again. This time Bruno's eyes met hers through the mirror, just for a moment. Long enough for something unspoken to flicker, A memory, maybe, of another front seat, another uniform, another woman with tired eyes and something unhealed in her chest. The light turned green. They kept driving. No one filled the silence. But it wasn't empty. It was gentle, like a room where someone has just stopped crying and no one rushes to break the stillness. And in that silence something began to breathe. The car door clicked open with a soft mechanical sigh, and golden light spilled in, early evening sun slipping behind the treetops, casting a glow over the modest porch and its two weathered steps. The yard was quiet. No fences, no echoes of barking. Bruno stood at the edge of the back seat, unmoving. Clara held the leash gently, not tugging, just offering. Mira stood a few feet ahead, backpack slung off one shoulder, her hand hovering over the door handle like it was a sacred thing. "Come on, Bruno," she said softly, not with urgency, but like an invitation whispered through time. He shifted weight, a paw down, then stopped. The door loomed wide open, no bars, no kennel latch, no echoing clanks or fluorescent hum, only warm wood, the faint scent of soap and fabric softener, and the creak of wind in the trees. He lowered his nose to the step, inhaled. The wood was worn, grooved by years of shoes and seasons, but to him it was unmarked, unknown, uncoded. Clara stepped back, kneeling. Her knees touched gravel. "You're safe now," she murmured. The words weren't magic, but they weren't empty either. Bruno blinked. Once, twice, as if testing the world for tricks. Then slowly, with the careful grace of someone who's learned the ground can betray you, he stepped down, onto the path, up the stairs, toward the door, one paw inside, then another. The threshold passed beneath him like a quiet breath. No alarms, no shouting, no return to command. Just wood floor, low lamplight, the faint smell of dinner long since eaten. He stood in the entryway, backlit by the sun, muscles taut but not trembling. His eyes scanned everything, cautious, reverent. Mira stepped aside, giving him room. He didn't wag, didn't pace, but he didn't leave. He was in. And that somehow felt like everything. The house held its breath. Every creak of the wooden floor, every gust through the old vents, felt like a voice testing how far it could whisper before someone startled. Bruno moved like a shadow, learning new walls, nose low, steps deliberate, never in a straight line. He sniffed each room like it might vanish if he looked too fast. The hallway was the longest. He paused there, ears swiveling, nostrils twitching, as if tracking echoes only he could hear. At the bathroom door, he stepped back. Too small, too many angles. Tight corners meant no retreat. He turned away before the mirror could catch him. In the living room, Mira sat cross-legged on the carpet, a blanket over her knees. She didn't speak, just placed a small treat on the rug a few feet away, then another, a foot closer. Bruno noticed. He didn't move. She placed one more, close enough that he could take it without reaching, then stayed still, like breath carved into stillness. But he didn't eat, didn't even sniff it. Not yet. Instead, he moved past her silent, measured toward the corner behind the couch where the shadows pooled deepest. He stood there for several long minutes, half his body hidden, watching the room through narrowed eyes. Clara leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, but not out of judgment, out of distance, the kind of distance that protects both ways. He had that look again, the wariness of someone trained not to trust what came without warning. She remembered that look. Afghanistan. A medic tent. A soldier who flinched at kindness. "Let him move at his pace," Joanne had said at the shelter. But Clara wasn't sure she even remembered how to pace healing anymore. She watched as Bruno circled a corner of the dining room once. Then again. Then lay down, not quite resting, just lowering himself as if waiting for a signal that never came. One eye stayed open. Guarding. Mira quietly gathered her uneaten treats, tucked them back into the jar, and whispered as she walked past him, "It's okay. We're not going anywhere." Bruno didn't move, but as she passed, that one eye followed her, not fearful, not grateful, just awake. The clock whispered past 2:13 a.m. Clara stirred to a sound that wasn't a sound, a shift in the air more than anything else. Not footsteps, not breathing, just presence. She slipped from bed barefoot, heart alert, muscle memory guiding her down the hall without turning on a light. And then she saw him, Bruno, standing outside Mira's room, not moving, not scratching, not barking, just watching. His silhouette cut a sharp figure in the hallway, moonlight shoulders squared, tail still. Ears pricked slightly forward, but not tense. As if he were listening for something deeper than footsteps. Clara froze. Not from fear, but from a knowing. The quiet was heavy, not hollow. She could almost hear her own heartbeat slow to match his stillness. Mira's door was cracked. Inside, the soft rise and fall of sleep hummed like lullaby breath. And there, guarding it like something sacred, stood the dog that hadn't wagged once since they met. Bruno didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her, but he knew she was there. Clara's throat tightened, a memory surfaced before she could stop it. Desert tent, night like smoke. She was kneeling beside a cot, pressing gauze to a boy barely 19, whispering to keep him tethered. Outside, mortars in the distance. Inside, silence, as fragile as glass. She didn't leave his side. Not until dawn cracked the tarp and someone else came to relieve her. Not a sound, just presence. She swallowed. The hallway smelled of old wood and lavender detergent. Bruno blinked slowly. Clara sank against the wall, knees to chest, not speaking. Just there. They sat like that for a while, soldier and nurse, one in fur, one in skin, each knowing in their own way what it meant to stand guard for someone who didn't even know they needed it. The morning poured in soft and gold, light spilling over the hardwood like it, too, had been waiting all night. Mira tiptoed into the living room barefoot, her pajama sleeves trailing past her wrists. The house was still. No cartoons, no sizzling eggs, no radio, just the hush of early light settling into corners. Bruno was there, curled, sort of, half upright, half wary, in the spot near the back window. His eyes were open but quiet, alert but not alarmed. The blanket beneath him was barely wrinkled, like he hadn't dared fully sleep. Mira didn't speak. She just walked slowly across the floor. No sudden moves, no calls, no squeals, just soft breath through her nose and tiny footsteps that matched the rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She paused a few feet behind him, waited. The sun touched his fur, first lighting the faint gray along his neck, the creases of age above his brows. He didn't look back, didn't move, but his ears shifted just slightly. He knew. She sank to the floor, knees folding beneath her. Cross-legged now, close, but not touching. Still no words. Minutes passed. One of her curls slipped loose and hung beside her cheek. She brushed it back, eyes never leaving him. Then, without warning, without ceremony, she reached out, a small hand, bare fingers. She placed it gently on his back. No petting, no stroking, just presence. Bruno didn't flinch, didn't move. He just breathed. And in that breath, something unspoken passed between them. Not a bond, not yet, but the beginning of one. A flicker of something warmer than understanding, quieter than comfort. Mira exhaled. Still she didn't speak. She let her hand rest there, still, steady. Trust wasn't asked for. It was earned, one silent morning at a time. The morning had seemed peaceful. Mira was humming something tuneless at the kitchen table, drawing lazy spirals on the condensation of her orange juice glass. Clara stood at the stove, flipping eggs, her eyes still heavy with sleep. The radio whispered a low instrumental in the background. Then the spoon dropped. It wasn't loud. Just a clatter against tile, a common, clumsy sound of breakfast. But Bruno shot upright. He hadn't been sleeping. Not really, just resting near the back door, paws tucked, head low. But the moment metal met ceramic, his body surged with the force of a pulled wire. Every muscle stiffened, tail low, ears sharp, eyes locked, hyper-alert, frozen, not from confusion, but recognition. Training. It was in his bones. Clara froze mid-step, spatula hovering in the air. She'd seen that posture before, not here, not in this house, but in tents, in mud, in halls lined with cots and the kind of silence that wasn't peace, just waiting. She lowered her hand slowly, whispering, "It's okay. Nothing's wrong." Bruno didn't move. Not yet. He was assessing, calculating. Something inside him flipping through files older than this house, this morning, this family. Then, after long seconds, his body loosened. Just a fraction. He didn't sit, but his front paw stepped back an inch. A shift. A signal. Mira had gone still, watching. "Why'd he do that?" she asked, voice small. Clara moved to kneel beside him, giving space without touch. Her gaze lingered on the taut line of his spine. "He's not just reacting," she murmured. "He's remembering." "Remembering what?" Mira asked. "Like someone yelling?" Clara shook her head slowly. "Not yelling. Signals. Triggers. Things he had to know. Things he had to survive." Mira blinked. Was he scared on the job too? Clara's throat caught. She looked at Bruno again. His eyes were still alert. One ear twitching toward the hallway creak from upstairs. Always listening, always on. Her voice came soft, heavy. "He probably never got to ask." Mira didn't answer. She just looked at Bruno like she was seeing not a dog, but a whole silent history stitched beneath his fur. And Bruno, sensing the quiet, sat down. His eyes found the child's. He didn't wag, didn't look away. But for the first time that morning he blinked. Slow, deliberate. A signal. And maybe, just maybe, a yes. The delivery arrived on a Tuesday, wrapped in plain brown paper, no return address, only a smudged stamp from the precinct's K-9 division. Mira was at school, Bruno asleep under the kitchen table, so Clara signed without questions and set the package on the counter. It was lighter than she expected, but carried a gravity that made the wood creak when she laid it down. She didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she went about the day as if an unopened past hadn't just appeared in her kitchen. She folded laundry, answered emails, boiled pasta that Mira insisted needed extra cheese. But each time Clara passed the counter, the box seemed to lean toward her, whispering. That night, once the dishes were done and Mira tucked into bed with a soft "Good night, Bruno" drifting down the hall, Clara returned to the kitchen. Only the stovetop light glowed enough to cast long shadows, but not enough to lie. She sliced the tape carefully. Inside was another box, an old storage crate the color of desert dust, a faded stencil on the lid, K9 Bruno, Unit 12B. Her breath caught. She lifted the lid and time folded. Photographs first. A young German shepherd in full vest, ears spear straight, standing beside a broad-shouldered man with smiling eyes. The same dog mid-air over a training wall, jaw tight around a sleeve. A candid shot. The man kneeling, tying a bandage on the dog's paw, tongue out in what could only be laughter. Next, medals, 2 commendation bars still clipped to a strip of uniform fabric. They clinked softly, as if uncomfortable outside a dress blues jacket. Then, the leash. Thick, worn leather, the handle darkened by years of sweat and weather. Clara ran her thumb over the places where the leather had cracked, mended, cracked again. Beneath it all lay a single envelope, cream-colored, edges yellowing. Her name wasn't on it, just "To whom he finds." Clara unfolded the note with surgeon's precision. "If you are reading this, Bruno has a new partner. He stayed by Ray's hospital bed until the monitors went silent. We tried, but the house was too empty and the memories too loud. Please know he was never just a dog. He was the last heartbeat of my husband's courage. Give him somewhere soft to rest his own. Elise Hale." Clara pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. Images surfaced tense, lit by headlamps, stretchers lined like quiet prayers. A young medic, herself so much younger, whispering promises she couldn't guarantee. "Hold on. I'm here. You're not alone." Promises that sometimes held, sometimes didn't. A floorboard creaked. She looked up to see Bruno in the doorway, head tilted, eyes reflecting the small circle of light. He hadn't made a sound, yet somehow he knew this history had called him. Clara knelt, the leash dangling from her fingers. "Is this yours, boy?" He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and lowered his head. Not to take the leash, but to rest his muzzle against the frayed leather, the way someone might press their lips to a photograph. Clara's voice fractured. "He said you stayed till the end." Bruno didn't move. But his eyes, those weathered embers, met hers, and in them she saw an echo of every vigil she'd ever stood, every hand she'd held past hope. A soft sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. She reached out, let her palm settle against his neck. This time he leaned in, almost weightless, as if the permission to remember had finally arrived. Around them the house remained still, but the silence was different now, not empty inhabited, filled with the breath of the past, the pulse of the present, and a promise Elise Hale hadn't been able to keep, but Clara could try to honor. "Come on," she whispered, gathering the photos, the medals, the note. "Let's put these where they belong." Bruno followed her down the hall. No command, no leash, just the soft click of paws beside footsteps, carrying history toward something that, for the first time, felt a little like home. The first rumble came like a low-slung growl, somewhere beyond the tree line, distant, but carrying the weight of something too heavy for the sky to hold. Mira was on the living room floor, crayons scattered around a nearly finished picture of Bruno wearing a superhero cape. The window pane quivered and a pale flash lit the room for the briefest blink. Then the second rumble rolled closer, deeper, vibrating through the hardwood into her knees. She froze. The crayons rolled away, forgotten. Another flash brighter now, followed by a crack that shattered the hush like glass. Mira's breath hitched. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding louder than the thunder, and sprinted down the hallway. "Bruno!" He was already searching for a place to vanish, head low, tail tucked tight, body pressed against the narrow shadow between the sofa and the wall. Each boom tightened the tremor in his shoulders, every flash stole color from his eyes. The dog who had faced gunfire and sirens now shook like a leaf, bracing for winter. Mira dropped to her knees beside him, voice small but urgent. "It's okay. It's just noise." Another crash. Bruno flinched, trying to wedge himself farther into the impossible gap, nails scraping wood. Mira's throat constricted. "Mom always says brave is what you do after you're scared." She remembered. She stood, darted to the hall closet, and yanked out an armful of blankets' blue fleece, an old quilt, her favorite galaxy throw. Pillows, too, the big couch cushions that smelled like popcorn movie nights. She dragged them back, stacking, draping, constructing a half-moon shelter between the coffee table and the couch. A tiny tent of softness. Thunder rolled again closer, harder rattling the dishes in the cupboard. Bruno whimpered, eyes frantic. Mira crouched, one blanket still in her arms, and extended it like an invitation. "Come hide with me." She didn't reach for his collar. She just scooted backward into the fort, patting the quilted floor. Another flash bleached the room white, but inside the blanket walls the light dulled to a muted glow. Bruno hesitated, trembling, panting shallow, but Mira's voice came again, steady now, like a rope tossed across fear. "I've got you. Safe fort, remember?" He inched forward, paws slipping on the hardwood, until the first blanket brushed his nose. He sniffed lavender detergent, Mira's shampoo from last night's bath, then shuffled the rest of the way in, muscles taut as wire. Mira draped the last blanket over the entrance, sealing them in a cocoon of dark blues and stitched constellations. Inside, the thunder became a muffled drum. Rain splattered the roof in thick, hurried drops, but the quilt absorbed the brightness, the boom, the world's sharp edges. Mira lay on her side, leaving space. Bruno circled, once instinct older than storms, then collapsed, ribs still shuddering beneath her star-patterned throw. She whispered, "Good boy. You're okay." Minutes bled together. Every new thunderclap made his ears twitch, but the violent shuddering slowed. Mira hummed soft, aimless notes weaving through the hush. She didn't stroke his fur. She just let her hand rest near his shoulder so he could feel her warmth if he chose. Somewhere between one rumble and the next, Bruno's breathing lengthened. His head eased onto his paws. The storm outside tore at the sky, but inside the patchwork stronghold, a retired soldier closed his eyes and slipped by inches into sleep. Mira's own eyelids fluttered. She pulled the galaxy blanket up to her chin and allowed herself a tiny smile. Thunder still rolled, but for the first time, it felt like background noise, like distant waves crashing while she floated somewhere safe. Above the fort, the room flashed again lightning's final defiance, but neither child nor dog stirred. Because under stars stitched in cotton thread and promises whispered in the dark, they had found something stronger than thunder. They had found quiet. It began with a single signature, a document stamped "Confidential Texas Interstate Placement Waiver," pulled from Victor's seized records. But what unraveled the truth wasn't the form, it was the second name beneath it, a state official, long declared dead in 2019. The ink? Fresh. The system hadn't just failed Jules, it had been complicit. The Department of Justice responded, not with apologies, but with action. In 6 short lines, the Office of Civil Rights and the Child Exploitation Task Force announced a federal investigation into adoption and custody fraud. Whistleblowers were promised protection. Records would be subpoenaed. Silence was no longer acceptable. Within 72 hours, offices across the South rang with consequence. 4 caseworkers resigned. 2 judges were placed on leave. Sealed adoption files were ordered open. And behind every file was a name. A child who didn't have to vanish. A mother who didn't have to fight. A silence that never should have been. Camille didn't celebrate. She didn't even smile when Gabriel called and said, "We're finally cracking it." She only walked to Jules' room that night and whispered, "You were never the only one." And she was right. In Tulsa, 10-year-old Raina was found with a drawing in her sock, a woman's face and a note, "Don't forget her." It was her mother. In El Paso, a boy named Derek was located in a private behavioral facility under a false name. No consent. When shown a photo of Shadow, he whispered, "That's the one from TV. The dog that stays." Camille barely slept that week, not from fear, but because stories flooded in. Tips. Old lawyers. Former caseworkers who had finally found their voices. Cracks were spidering through what had once seemed unbreakable. By week's end, 15 officials suspended or indicted. 7 children reunited. 3 cases reopened. A quiet headline read, "The Dog Who Broke the System." Camille saved that article, not for the title, but for the photo beneath it. Jules, holding Shadow's face in both hands, smiling with a calm born only when the world finally stops lying. In that image, Shadow was no longer a working dog. He was home. Gabriel sat alone in the dimly lit office of the task force, final case file before him. Shadow lay quietly at his feet. Every page Gabriel turned held a life, a rescued child, a missed warning, a system that looked the other way. One report quoted a social worker who'd tried to raise the alarm years ago. Her words cut deep. It wasn't negligence. It was apathy. Gabriel read the names of the children found. Raina, Derek. One line at a time, a pattern of silence exposed by a dog who didn't speak but never stopped listening. At the end of the file was a letter in Camille's handwriting. "Thank you for listening when the world didn't, for believing, for giving my son and me a second chance." Gabriel closed the folder, running a hand over Shadow's back. "We did it, old friend," he said. "Not alone, but because you never stopped barking." Shadow lifted his head, gave a soft nudge to Gabriel's hand, then settled again. The phone rang that afternoon. Camille was folding laundry in the kitchen while Jules and Shadow played outside. The voice on the other end was calm, warm. "Ms. Duran? This is Agent Morales from DOJ. We've just found another child. Her name is Lila. She's safe. She'll be going home tonight." Camille sank into the kitchen chair, heart swelling. Outside, Shadow barked, no longer a warning, but a declaration. She called softly, "Shadow." The dog trotted over, steady as ever. She knelt, arms around him. "You didn't just save my son," she whispered. "You started something bigger." That evening, dusk fell gently on their backyard. Jules dashed through the garden in his cape as Shadow chased fireflies like little stars come to earth. Camille called Jules over and crouched beside him. "Lila is safe because of you," she said. "And because of him." Jules blinked. "Because of me?" She nodded. "Heroes don't stop after one rescue." Jules hugged Shadow's neck tightly. Camille wrapped her arms around them both. From inside the house, the phone rang again. Gabriel's voice held that same thread of awe. "Another child, Camille. We found Lila Sandoval in Phoenix, same forged forms, same funding trail." "And the man?" she asked. "Arrested. No bail. Shadow's bark keeps echoing." Camille laughed softly, wiping tears. "The circle's widening." Outside, Jules shouted, "Mom, look! Shadow's chasing the moonbugs." The dog bounded, tail spinning like joy set loose. Camille joined her son and whispered, "We should send Lila a cape." Jules beamed. "And a picture of the flying dog who found her." Shadow barked once, sharp, triumphant. It wasn't the last bark. Not even close. The next morning began with scrambled eggs. Mira whisked them just like her mom taught her. She plated them in a daisy-printed bowl and carried it softly across the house. Bruno, lying on the galaxy blanket, watched in silence. She didn't speak. She just offered him one bite. He sniffed, paused, then gently accepted. A second bite. Then a third. Then eye contact. Then a tail wag. Small. Almost invisible. But real. Clara appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand, her eyes locked on Bruno's shifting tail and Mira's glowing face. Something warm cracked open in her chest. Hope. Later that afternoon, Clara took Bruno for his first walk. The world was noisy cars, birds, footsteps, wind, but Bruno matched her pace, not tugging, not panicked, just watchful. At the park, a neighbor leaned in too quickly. Bruno froze. Clara stepped between them. "He's learning to trust the world again." The neighbor backed away, respectfully. Bruno exhaled and stayed, one sniff, no growl, just forward and progress. On the way home, Clara noticed the leash was slack. Bruno could have wandered. He didn't. At bedtime, Mira tucked a folded note behind a framed photograph of Bruno as a young canine beside Officer Hale. "Dear Bruno, thank you for keeping people safe. You can rest now. Love, Mira." Bruno walked into the room, stared at the photo, and slowly sat down beneath it, same posture as in the picture. He sighed and stayed. Clara whispered, "Rest easy, soldier," and kissed his head. He didn't flinch. He slept. Truly slept. Outside, the world turned. Inside, hope wagged 4 times, then 5, and a home exhaled, knowing no footsteps would echo tonight. Just a breath, a heartbeat, and a badge on the wall, shimmering in moonlight. Because some heroes never needed capes, just a second chance, and someone who stayed. Saturday morning draped the street in quiet pastels. Clara clipped Bruno's leash, Mira skipped beside her with a basket of thank-you muffins, and the old dog padded just ahead, steady, alert, tail sweeping in slow permission. It wasn't a walk, it was a reintroduction. Mr. Winters looked up from his garden. "Morning, Clara Mira, and morning to the hero!" Bruno gave a flick of acknowledgement. A few houses later, Mrs. Nguyen handed over dental chews with her toddler clinging tight. Bruno sniffed, looked to Clara, then gently took one. Mira giggled. He never took food from strangers before. Word spread faster than Clara expected. At the park, a silver-haired man in a pressed jacket stopped mid-stride. His gaze settled on Bruno. I shadowed narcotics back in 19. Saw him take down a gunman without a shot fired. He saluted, not Clara, but the dog. Bruno met his eyes. No wag, no fear, just memory. That evening, Mira posted a photo of Bruno asleep on his constellation bed, beside his badge photo and her robin egg note. Meet Bruno, retired K9, adopted after spending over a year in a shelter. He kept people safe his whole life. Now we get to keep him safe. Our old dogs, new homes. K9, hero. By morning, it had spread first neighbors, then the town's news page. Stories followed in comments. He's a legend. My uncle was on that force. Senior dogs deserve the world. Blankets arrived on the porch. Treats. A sign painted by teens. Good boy, parking only. Clara knelt beside him. They know you now, she whispered. Bruno's tail thumped twice, not out of duty, out of peace. They returned to the shelter a week later, not as adopters, but as ambassadors. Joanne met them at the door, grinning. Sergeant Bruno, reporting for duty. He walked in calm and solid, leash loose like a ribbon. No tremble, just presence. Inside, a family waited by the desk. The youngest boy gasped, "That's him! The hero dog!" Clara watched Bruno's posture ears up, body soft. He didn't flinch as the boy stepped forward. Joanne led the family away to meet another dog. Jasper, older, silvered, steady. Bruno watched them go, tail still. A soldier recognizing another. Mira arranged donations by color and size, taped the good boy sign to the cart. One volunteer wiped away tears. Clara knelt beside Bruno. Ready to see your old room? At the end of the hallway was the vacant kennel, a clean blanket, a note on the gate. This space held a hero. Bruno sniffed once and turned away. When they left, Jasper walked beside the children, already homebound in spirit. Mira crouched by Bruno. Gentle waves, she told the other kids, and they mimicked her hands, soft, no pressure, no noise. Bruno allowed it. Tails brushed. Two veterans nodded across the silence. Before leaving, Clara handed Joanne an envelope, Bruno's medical file, and a note. If anyone needs courage, give them our number. Back in the van, Bruno curled up beside Mira. She pressed her cheek to his shoulder. Think Jasper likes muffins? Clara smiled. He will. By the time they reached home, the shelter's new post had gone viral. Inspired by Bruno, Jasper finds home at 10. Donations flooded in. Senior dog hashtags bloomed like wildflowers. Clara didn't need the headlines. Bruno didn't need applause. Just the hum of the road, the warmth of the girl beside him, and a world beginning to remember. At the community center, Clara stood at the podium, nerves humming like live wire. Veterans in old caps and younger faces with canes watched her. Bruno lay beside her, still as granite. I'm not here as a medic, she began, but as the person lucky enough to live with a retired K9. The screen behind her glowed with slides, training grounds, kennels, aging dogs. Every year working dogs retire. Some find homes, some don't. They gave everything and don't always know how to ask for a warm bed. A map lit up, speckled red. Each pin was a shelter that took in at least one retired K9 in the last 3 years. Clara's voice steadied. Bruno had stopped asking, but once you look into those eyes, you can't unsee them. The final slide showed his photo in the frame, Mira's note tucked beneath it. We don't erase their past. We give it meaning. Applause rose, not wild, but deep. When Clara knelt, Bruno leaned into her palm. No wag, just acceptance. A week later, Mira's classroom buzzed with color. Banners read, "Old dogs are still heroes." She stood in front, holding glitter-glued note cards. "This is Bruno," she said. "He used to be a police officer. Kind of." Laughter fluttered. She clicked through slides. Bruno on adoption day. Bruno asleep beneath his badge, drawings of senior dogs in capes. "We're hanging these flyers all over town," she said. "If you want one, take it." Hands shot up. "Does Bruno do tricks?" a boy asked. "The best ones stay," Mira said, "because now he knows he can." She gave the hand signal. Bruno didn't move, didn't flinch. "Good, stay," she whispered. His tail swept the floor 3 times. Applause followed, just loud enough to last. That night, Clara scrolled through emails, adoption requests, a grant from a veteran support group, an interview offer from a regional channel. In the den, Mira colored thank you cards. Bruno slept beside her, paws twitching, muzzle rising and falling in a rhythm older than orders and far gentler than gunfire. Clara crossed the room, sat beside him, and placed her hand on his back. He didn't stir, just sighed against her palm. And in that breath, Clara heard it clearly. Not an ending, a legacy. A dog who stayed and taught a town how to love out loud again. Snow came quietly in the night, dusting rooftops and tree limbs like confectioner's sugar sifted by an invisible hand. By morning, the street lay under a hush so complete even the mailboxes seemed to exhale white breath. Inside the foster home, warmth glowed from every window, as though the house itself remembered how cold the world had once been and vowed never to let that chill inside again. Bruno sensed the change before he opened his eyes. Cold pressed against the glass panes, but a different warmth radiated at his back. The fireplace Clara had coaxed to life at dawn, logs popping gentle applause each time a flame found new purchase. He stretched slow, luxurious, with a soft groan in his chest, then resettled on the thick wool rug Mira had insisted was snow cloud gray. The fire painted his coat in flickers of amber, like medals catching sun on parade day. His tail swept once, twice, a steady metronome of contentment. Across the room, Mira sat at the upright piano, an old mahogany piece inherited from Clara's grandmother, its ivory keys faded to the color of parchment. Mira's feet barely reached the pedals, but her fingers floated with surprising confidence through the first notes of Moon River. She'd practiced for weeks, plunking the melody until muscle memory learned to breathe with it. Now, with the house blanketed in silence, the tune drifted like snowflakes, gentle, unhurried, settling on everything it touched. Bruno's ears twitched at the opening chord. He lifted his head just enough to watch her over the low back of the sofa. Small shoulders straight, brow furrowed in determination, the tip of her tongue peeking out whenever she reached for a stretch an octave away. Each measure she conquered coaxed another lazy thump from his tail. Not excited, affirming. "I hear you. Keep going." Clara curled in the armchair closest to the hearth, knees tucked beneath a knitted throw, a paperback open in her lap. For the first time in years, the margins of the page held her attention longer than the edges of her worries. Her eyes followed the words in slow, savoring sips. Every so often she paused to glance over the rim of her reading glasses, at Bruno drowsing in firelight, at Mira weaving notes into morning light. Each glance deepened the faint smile that had taken up residency on her face, no longer a guest, but a rightful tenant. A gust rattled the window, swirling snow like glitter in a shaken globe. Bruno's ear flicked, but he didn't lift his head. Storms no longer summoned ghosts. The fire cracked again, a friendly reminder that warmth was within reach, not a luxury but a given. Mira moved into the bridge, a delicate arpeggio that once made her whine in frustration. Today her fingers danced without hesitation. She peeked sideways to see if anyone had noticed. Bruno's eyes followed hers, lids half-masked yet bright, and his tail brushed the rug in quiet applause. The acknowledgment electrified her. She straightened, took the final run with a flourish, and ended on a lingering chord that seemed to float just above the flames before dissolving into the hush. "Beautiful," Clara said, voice soft with genuine awe. Mira swung around on the bench, cheeks flushed pinker than the scarf looped at her neck. "He liked it too, Mom." She pointed at Bruno's tail, now still but ready. "I saw him wag." Clara closed her book, marking the page with a strand of yarn. "He has impeccable taste." Mira tiptoed across the hardwood, slippers whispering. She knelt beside Bruno, placing a hand on his shoulder where heat from the fire met the coolness lingering in his fur. Time slowed to match the cadence of his breathing steady, unguarded. Outside, a snow-laden branch bowed under its burden, then sprang free, dropping a powdery sigh onto the world. "I'm working on Clair de Lune next," Mira confided to Bruno, as though it were top-secret intelligence. "It's harder, lots of sharps." Bruno blinked, his amber gaze steady on her face. She leaned closer. "You'll help me practice, right?" His answer came not in bark or wag, but in the soft press of his muzzle to her palm, a gesture that said, "I'm here, and here is safe." Clara set her book aside and rose, stretching muscles that no longer carried tension like extra armor. She crossed to the piano, lifting the lid on the bench. Inside lay sheets of beginner exercises, scribbled with Mira's pencil notes and little smiley-faced trophies Clara drew for each milestone. She added a new star with blue ink beside Moon River, dating it First Snow. "Perfect soundtrack," she said, tapping the page. Mira beamed. "Next recital, Bruno gets front row." Clara glanced at the dog now drifting toward sleep, eyes at half-mast, body surrendered to warmth. "We'll have to bring a rug. Chairs aren't his style." They laughed, quiet, so as not to shatter the moment. Bruno's tail swished once more, a punctuation mark on contentment. He shifted, pressing a little closer to the hearth, paws twitching as though chasing dreams woven from piano notes and the crackle of burning oak. Outside, snow kept falling, but the cold stayed obediently on the other side of the glass. Clara reclaimed her chair, Mira returned to the keys, and Bruno dozed amid the glow. Peace, Clara thought, letting her eyes drift shut for a heartbeat. So this is how it sounds. Not absence of noise, but harmony. A child at the piano, a dog safe at the hearth, pages turning under fingers no longer trembling. A home no longer bracing for the worst, but settling gratefully into the best of ordinary hours. Mira began the song again, slower this time, letting each note linger. Bruno's breathing synced to the rhythm, tail giving a final gentle tap as if to say, "Play it again, dawn is long and we are home," and we are. And for the first time since winter began, Clara hoped the snow would keep falling, soft, steady, unhurried, just long enough to hold this morning like a photograph she could step into whenever memories threatened to pull her back to darker winters she'd already survived. Outside, white kept drifting from a sky the color of quiet, and inside, by a crackling fire, a retired hero slept, a child played, and a mother finally believed that peace was not a visitor, but a resident who'd decided to stay. The house woke early to the smell of vanilla and anticipation. Clara had been up since dawn, frosting cupcakes the color of sunrise while trying not to smear icing on the handwritten banner taped across the bay window. "Happy 8th, Mira." Balloons sky blue and lavender bobbed on curling ribbons tied to every chair. A stack of presents waited beneath the piano. Small boxes wrapped in comic strip paper. One larger parcel disguised beneath a quilt so lumpy it practically shouted bicycle, though Mira had yet to notice. She'd spent the morning twirling in her new yellow dress, counting guests on her fingers, school friends due at noon, Grandma via video chat, Mrs. Patterson delivering her legendary zucchini bread. But a hush fell over her excitement whenever her gaze drifted toward Bruno's bed by the hearth, currently empty. "Mom, where's he gone?" she asked, adjusting a paper crown that slid over one ear. "Out back with Mr. Winters," Clara answered, smoothing her daughter's unruly curls. "Something about important yard business." Mira's brow scrunched. "Yard business?" Clara shrugged, fighting a mischievous smile. "Grown-up dog stuff, I guess." Out on the patio, Mr. Winters knelt beside Bruno, fingers working a satin ribbon-deep forest green into a loose, comfortable bow around the shepherd's neck. At the ribbon's center hung a small brass tag, polished until it reflected the winter sun like liquid gold. Etched in careful block letters, "Home." Bruno tolerated the fuss with patient dignity. Winters chuckled. "You've worn heavier hardware, old boy. This one's pure decoration." He gave the tag a gentle tap. It rang a bright, hopeful chime. Inside, children's laughter erupted as the first guests arrived. Clara peeked through the curtains, catching Winter's eye. He nodded. The mission was a go. "Ready, Sergeant?" he asked. Bruno's tail lifted in a single, confident sweep. Mira was corralling her friends toward the craft table glitter glue, already threatening to unionize, when the back door latch clicked. She turned, half expecting more adults balancing casserole dishes. Bruno stepped into the living room. Time hiccuped. The satin bow rested perfectly against his chest, the brass tag flashing with each measured stride. He held his head high, ears erect, not the wary stance of months ago, but a parade posture. Yet his eyes sought only one face, the girl in the yellow dress whose gasp melted the chatter into reverent silence. Mira's hands flew to her mouth. "Bruno, what's on your collar?" She crossed the room in quick, soft steps, friends parting like petals around her. Bruno halted, allowing her small fingers to trace the engraved word. She read it aloud, voice trembling with wonder. "Home." For a heartbeat, everything stilled, the cupcakes cooling, balloons swaying, adults wiping sudden moisture from eyes. Winter sunlight pooled around dog and child, turning dust motes into gold flakes. Mira looked up, eyes shimmering. "Does this mean—" Clara answered from the doorway, her voice warm gravel. "Means he belongs here. Always." Mira's face crumpled in the best way joy folding over itself, and she wrapped her arms around Bruno's neck, cheek pressed to the soft fur at his ruff. "You're not just a good boy," she whispered, words meant only for him, though everyone heard. "You're my best friend." Bruno didn't flinch. His tail swept the floor, 1, 2, 3 slow wags, then settled against her legs, anchoring them together like roots. Someone sniffed loudly. Possibly Clara. Mrs. Patterson dabbed her eyes with a napkin patterned in dancing pumpkins left over from Halloween, but none of the kids cared. "Group picture!" shouted Mrs. Nguyen, lifting her phone. Children clustered around, paper crowns askew, arms draped over shoulders. Bruno sat tall at center front, ribbon catching the light, Mira's hand nestled in the fur at his chest. The shutter clicked, capturing more than a moment, securing proof that sometimes the greatest gift doesn't fit under wrapping paper. Sometimes it walks in on 4 paws carrying the word everyone longs to claim. As the party spilled toward cake time, Bruno followed Mira to the table, accepting a homemade peanut butter pup cake ceremoniously placed on its own plate. He waited, patient, disciplined, until she gave the release word they'd practiced. Freedom. Then he devoured the treat in 2 polite bites, crumbs falling like confetti. Children resumed their noisy orbit, but Mira remained close, fingers occasionally brushing the brass tag as if confirming it was still real. And Clara, watching from the kitchen archway, realized peace was no longer simply present. It was festive, filling rooms with light, frosting smiles, and the quiet clink of a tag that sang one clear note every time Bruno moved. Home. Night wrapped the house in velvet. The party's laughter had long faded. Stray balloons drifted against ceilings like sleepy moons, and frosting-smeared plates waited in the sink for tomorrow's dawn. Only the fireplace still breathed, its embers pulsing red beneath a soft quilt of ash. Bruno lay on the galaxy blanket in front of the hearth, body curved around himself in a gentle crescent. Mira had fallen asleep beside him hours earlier, birthday crown askew, thumb tucked near her chin, until Clara carried the drowsy girl to bed without waking her. Now, the living room belonged to the dog who had once belonged nowhere. Clara returned in thick socks, the house slippers Mira insisted were mom cozy, and lowered into the armchair that faced both fire and friend. She held a mug of chamomile, steam curling like ghost stories no longer scary. Outside, snowflakes drifted under a street lamp's glow. Inside, quiet hummed a lullaby older than words. She watched Bruno's chest rise and fall, slow, steady, unhurried. One paw twitched, claws scraping the blanket in a tiny kick. A dream. Another twitch, gentler, followed by a sigh that pooled warm shadows across the rug. Clara set the mug on the side table, leaned forward and traced the brass tag at his collar. Home. The letters caught firelight and winked. She remembered the first day, the kennel's hushed despair, his clouded eyes, and felt tears prick, not sharp like grief, but soft like gratitude that overflows its cup. Her whisper floated between them. You made it, soldier. Memories unfurled. Bruno curled in that distant shelter corner, invisible to dozens of passing hands. His first 2 shaky steps into new sunlight, leash loose but heavy with hope. Mira building a fortress of blankets during a thunderstorm and learning quiet could be armor. A tail's hesitant sweep for scrambled eggs, then steady thumps for piano keys and cupcakes. Neighbors arriving with blankets, a veteran's salute, posters declaring old dogs are still heroes, all leading to this firelight reflecting in peaceful eyes, no longer scanning doorways for danger. Clara's phone buzzed on the side table, breaking the hush. A message from Joanne flashed. Jasper's family just sent pictures. He's snoring on their couch. Thank Bruno for me." Clara smiled, thumb hovering before she typed. "He's sleeping, but I will. He knows." She set the phone aside, gaze returning to the shepherd who'd transformed their lives simply by surviving long enough to be loved. Mira's words echoed from months ago, spoken in the shelter corridor and carried like a mission directive. "He's not hurt. He's waiting to be seen." Seen. Clara reached to stroke behind his ear. The fur was coarse, edges silvering, but warm and alive under her fingertips. Bruno's tail flicked once in his sleep, a lazy pendulum marking time that finally felt generous. In his dream, Bruno trotted an open field, no leash, no commands, snow sparkling under moonlight. Beside him bounded a smaller shadow, a blur of yellow dress and giggles. Ahead, a sky framed by distant mountains, no sirens, no doors to guard. He ran, not in pursuit, but in play, paws light on powdery drifts. The air smelled of fresh bread and fireplace cedar. When the child laughed, the sound echoed like bells. He wagged, lungs drinking cold sweetness. A silhouette waited near a grove broad shoulders, familiar scent of coffee and leather. Bruno slowed, ears pricked. The man knelt, arm outstretched. Bruno approached, nose brushing warm palm. No orders, only welcome. A hand ruffled between his ears. At ease. He sat, leaning into the touch, eyes half closed against a horizon-washed gold. His foot twitched on the living room rug, a tiny echo of running free. Clara watched the twitch, felt a swell of protective tenderness anchor her to the chair. Years ago she'd kept vigil beside hospital beds, counting respirations, praying machines would quiet. Tonight, no machines, no alarms, only a fire's hum and a dog's dream breath. She whispered, "Rest easy, Bruno. We're on watch now." Another sigh broadened his ribs. The twitch stilled. Outside, a wind gust ruffled the house siding, but Bruno didn't stir. Trust held him heavier than any tranquilizer, trust that walls wouldn't vanish, that voices wouldn't disappear. Clara let her eyes drift to the mantel where a new frame stood. The adoption day photo, Mira's hand on Bruno's head, both gazing at each other as if recognizing an unfinished sentence only they could complete. Beside it rested Officer Hale's commendation bars, polished, mounted on walnut. 2 lives braided past and present like logs feeding the same flame. She settled back, pulling the throw over her knees. Embers clicked, shifting deeper into ash. Snow whispered against the window. Peace, once foreign, had become the household dialect spoken in quiet footfalls, measured breaths, gentle wags. In the final hush before sleep claimed her too, Clara considered how ordinary the scene looked from the outside. A woman drowsing by a fire, a dog dozing at her feet. Yet within that ordinariness lay an epic chapters of abandonment and discovery, of fear and courage, of silence answered by a single question. "What about him?" asked by a child who believed invisible things still mattered. And because of that question a leash had loosened, a heart had uncurled, a hero had laid down his watch. Bruno's paw twitched once more, then relaxed. His lips parted in a soft woof, the sound a contented punctuation mark to a story rewritten, not of duty, but of family. Bruno's journey reminds us that love doesn't keep score of age, scars, or silence. It shows up, waits patiently, and listens until hope answers back. German shepherds, with their steadfast hearts and keen intelligence, illustrate what every animal can teach us. Loyalty is not a trick, it's a choice. They renew every day we choose them back. By opening one kennel door, Clara and Mira discovered how a single act of compassion can ripple outward, rehoming another senior dog, inspiring children to champion old heroes, and uniting a community around gentle purpose. The story leaves us with simple, powerful truths. See the invisible, honor past service, and believe that second chances create first-time magic. Whether we adopt, foster, donate, or simply share these narratives, each of us can turn abandoned chapters into warm, ongoing tales of belonging. In every shelter, another Bruno waits not broken, just unseen, ready to trade worn duty for new family. May we meet their quiet hope with open doors, soft places to land, and the promise that they, too, are finally home.